What actually happens after the victory parade is over? We celebrate the win, right? We honor the soldiers, but we almost never look at the country's balance sheet. Well, today, we're going to pull back that curtain on one of history's most expensive illusions, the idea that winning a war makes a nation stronger. Because the reality, it's often the complete opposite.
Look, I know that sounds harsh, but it is a truth that's backed up by cold, hard numbers. Behind all the cheering crowds and the ticker tape, there's a hollowed-out treasury. While the soldiers are out there marching, the accountants are back in the office, staring at a fiscal cliff. We're told this epic story of triumph, but the numbers, they tell a very different story of economic ruin.
If you really want to understand the modern world, you have to follow the money. And when it comes to war, the money tells a brutal story. It's a story where even the so-called winners watch their GDP collapse, their savings get incinerated by inflation, and their global power gets sold off just to pay the bills. It turns out the price of victory can be a nation's entire future.
All right, so let's dive in. We're going to start by deconstructing the core illusion of victory itself. Then we'll look at a perfect case study, the British Empire. After that, we'll explore how modern warfare has just supercharged the costs. We'll uncover the hidden taxes that everyone ends up paying, and finally, we'll redefine what national strength really means.
Welcome to Capital in Context, where we tell the stories behind the world's most important economic and financial moments. Each video explores a moment in time, a market collapse, a policy decision, or a financial innovation, to explain exactly what happened, why it happened, and how it still shapes your world today.
Okay, first up, let's just tackle this central myth head on. There's this persistent, kind of dangerous idea that massive military spending is somehow good for an economy. You see factories humming 24/7, people have jobs, it looks like prosperity. But it's an illusion. And to really get why, we need to look at a classic economic concept.
And that concept is the broken window fallacy. So imagine this. Someone throws a rock through a baker's window. Okay, sure, the baker has to pay a glazier to fix it. That's economic activity, right? But here's the thing. That's money the baker could have spent on a brand new oven to bake more bread. The glazier's gain is the baker's loss. Destruction doesn't create wealth, it just diverts it from something productive to simple replacement. And war? Well, war is just this fallacy on a massive national scale.
And the contrast here is it's stark. On the left, you see the illusion, full employment, busy factories, all that stuff. But on the right, that's the reality, a negative economic shock. See, every dollar spent on a tank is a dollar that's not spent on a school or a hospital. This creates a massive opportunity cost, shrinking a nation's assets and damaging its ability to produce things for decades to come.
And the hard data absolutely backs this up. The losers of a major conflict, they see their economy shrink by an average of 24%. I mean, that's just catastrophic. But get this, even the winners see their GDP fall by an average of 13%. Winning doesn't save you, it just means your economic hangover is slightly less severe.
So let's see how this plays out in the real world with our first case study. And honestly, there is no better example of a victorious bankrupt than Great Britain after World War II. They stood proud, they defeated tyranny, but behind the scenes, the empire was literally collapsing under the weight of its own victory.
Just let that number sink in for a second. 36 billion pounds. In today's money, that is over $2 trillion. Every single bomb dropped, every ship launched, every soldier paid, it all went on the national credit card. This was the bill for survival, and it was a bill the British Empire simply could not afford to pay.
And this chart, wow, it just shows the result. By 1945, Britain's national debt had skyrocketed to 250% of its GDP. To put that into perspective, the country owed 2.5 times more than everything it produced in an entire year. The nation that once ruled a quarter of the globe was, for all practical purposes, completely bankrupt.
This timeline shows just how fast it all unraveled. I mean, as early as 1941, Britain was broke, totally relying on American lend-lease, but that help came with strings attached. By 1944, the US dollar had officially replaced the British pound as the world's reserve currency, so that victory in 45, it was a financial mirage. And the Suez Crisis in 56, well, that was the final nail in the coffin, when the whole world saw the old master taking financial orders from its former colony.
And for the average person, this economic collapse was felt deeply. It's a shocking fact,
But rationing of essentials like bread, meat, and fuel was actually more severe in Britain after the war than it had been during the conflict. They had won the war for democracy, but they couldn't afford to feed their own people. That, right there, is the price of a bankrupt victory.
Now, let's see how this pattern has evolved. Because if you think the costs were high back then, hoo boy, they have become astronomically higher in the 21st century. The weapons are more advanced, the supply chains are way more complex, and the price tags are, well, they're almost unbelievable.
Take a look at this. In a hypothetical conflict, just the advanced missiles used in the first 48 hours could cost over $5.6 billion. And that single figure doesn't even begin to account for the cost of fuel or personnel or the massive economic shockwave from something like oil prices going through the roof. The burn rate of modern warfare is just staggering.
And this is the broken window fallacy at a terrifying scale. By 2009, the Iraq War represented an estimated $860 billion that was not invested in American infrastructure, technology, or education. That is nearly $1 trillion of potential growth that was instead quite literally blown up in the desert.
So this is the mechanics of the debt machine. Even before a single shot is fired, a defense boom adds about 7 percentage points to public debt. Once the war actually starts, that jumps by another 14. All this deficit spending crowds out the kind of private investment that creates real, long-term growth and puts incredible strain on a country's financial stability.
And here's the trap. Governments consistently and dramatically underestimate the cost of war. The Vietnam War is the classic example. It ended up costing 10 times the initial projection. And why does this happen? Because once you're in, you're locked in. You can't just stop spending without admitting defeat. So you keep borrowing and you keep printing money until the system itself just begins to break.
So what happens when you keep borrowing and printing? Well, you pay for the war through hidden taxes that fall on every single citizen, often for generations. So let's explore the two most devastating of these: inflation and the permanent loss of human potential.
When a government can't raise taxes or borrow anymore, it turns to the printing press. Now, you combine that with wartime shortages of goods and raw materials, and you create something called cost-push inflation. Basically, the cost of everything goes up, not because of high demand, but because the supply chain is broken and the currency itself is being devalued.
And the impact is severe. On average, prices can rise by nearly 50% during a major war, and they often stay high for years afterward. This isn't just some statistic. This is the price of groceries, of gas, of your rent. It's a direct tax on the cost of living for ordinary people.
This is exactly why inflation is often called a stealth tax. It silently transfers wealth away from regular people, especially from savers. The money you worked your whole life to put away suddenly loses its value. It's basically wiped out to pay for bombs that have already been dropped and contracts that have already been paid. It is a massive redistribution of wealth from the middle class to the war machine.
But, perhaps the most tragic cost isn't financial at all. It's this concept of dead capital. Now, this isn't about the money spent on the war. It's about the economic value of the people who never come home. It's their lifetime of earnings, the businesses they never built, the innovations they never created, and the taxes they never paid. It is a permanent, unrecoverable loss.
Let's just break this down for a second. The loss of just one young soldier represents between $1 and $2.5 million in lost lifetime earnings alone. Now add to that the lost potential for innovation, the lost tax revenue, the businesses they might have started. Now multiply that. It is a permanent drag on a nation's GDP that no victory parade can ever fix.
And this isn't some theoretical exercise. I mean, look at the tragic war in Ukraine. With an estimated 1.2 million casualties, the high-end estimate for the lost economic output, that dead capital, is a staggering $840 billion. That is economic potential that has been permanently erased from the future of both nations.
So this brings us to the core of the issue. If military victory so often leads to economic ruin, then we have to completely rethink what it means to be a strong nation. Our entire definition of power might just be flawed.
Real, sustainable power doesn't come from the ability to destroy. It comes from the ability to produce, to trade, and to innovate. It belongs to nations with economic discipline who understand that national security is ultimately based on a solid financial foundation, not just a powerful army. I mean, think about it. You can't project power if you can't pay your bills.
And this is the ultimate takeaway.
The most expensive victory is just a bankruptcy in disguise. History shows us time and time again that without economic discipline, military might is nothing but a house of cards. The parade ends, the bills come due, and the victor is left weaker than when they even started.
And this really brings us to a final question for you. The math of war-induced debt, it doesn't change. This architecture of the IOU is a recurring pattern throughout history. So the real question is, can we learn to see these patterns developing in our own time?
If this explainer on the true cost of winning gave you a new perspective, make sure you subscribe to The Explainer. We are dedicated to uncovering these hidden stories that shape our world so you can see the patterns of history before they become your reality. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video interesting, hit subscribe to Capital in Context. Remember, it's not chaos, it's design. You were just never meant to see it.